In this demonstration, we'll take a look at using an OSINT tool such as reconnaissance. OSINT stands for Open Source Intelligence, and there's a number of tools that are considered OSINT tools that can be used to collect information from online sources just by using the tool and not really navigating through websites and stuff like that. So, reconnaissance is an example of an OSINT tool that we can use to collect information about an organization when we're performing a pen test on that company. So let's take a look at reconnaissance. First thing I'm going to do here is I'm going to start a terminal session, and I'm going to zoom in so you can see the text a little bit better. So the first thing we're going to do is go into reconnaissance by type in reconnaissance and press enter. Once we're in recon-ng, the first thing that I want you to notice is that our prompt has changed. So it shows that we're in the reconnaissance. So this is kind of a command line tool that has its own prompt. And notice that we're in what they call the default workspace. A workspace is an area where you're going to perform your work for a particular customer. So for instance, if you're performing a pen test for two different customers, you would have two different workspaces, one for each customer. So that's the first thing I want to do is I want to go and create a workspace for our customer, who in this case is Skillsoft. Now, before we create the workspace, I want to show you that we do have a workspaces command. Actually, before I show you that, I should show you when you're in the reconnaissance command prompt, you can use a question mark to get help on what commands are currently supported at your prompt. And I want you to notice that we do have workspaces command that we can use that allows us to manage workspaces. Notice that there's also a modules command that we can use to work with modules. And a marketplace command, that's another command we're going to work with, that we can use to work with what modules are installed. But let's start with workspaces. So we go with the workspaces command, and then we can use a question mark to get help on, okay, well, how do I use workspaces? And it says, great, you can use the workspaces command and then give a create or a list or load or remove option. So what I want to do is I want to list our workspaces here. So I'm going to do a workspaces list. And it shows we have one workspace, which is the default workspace. Well, that's great. We also saw up above here that there is a create option on the workspaces command. So let's go and create our own workspace. So we're going to do workspaces create. And for this customer, we're going to have a Skillsoft workspace. So notice that it's created that workspace, but it's also switched us to that workspace. So you can see here, it switched us to the Skillsoft workspace. So any work that I currently do within reconnaissance, it'll store all the data that is collected inside the Skillsoft workspace. That's important because eventually I'm going to print a report that's going to show the public information that was collected about this company and present that to management at that company. Now, just to show you before we start collecting information, I want to show you how to switch workspaces. So let's say for the next 2 hours, I'm going to work on, the pen test for Skillsoft, but then I'm going to switch over to another customer. So I need to be able to switch workspaces. So we can use the workspaces load command to load a workspace. So I'll load the default workspace. And you can see there my prompt has changed. I'm back at the default workspace. And if I want to go back to my Skillsoft workspace, then I use Skillsoft. So workspaces load Skillsoft. And again, my prompt has changed. I'm back in the Skillsoft workspace. So this will be all the data for that customer. So that's the idea of using workspaces. Now, the next thing that I want to point out, and if I scroll up here, when I first came into reconnaissance, I want you to notice that it said no modules are enabled or installed. So the functionality of reconnaissance comes from modules. And so what you want to do is you want to install the modules. Each module is designed to collect a specific type of information from a source on the internet. So for instance, there's Bing modules, LinkedIn modules, that kind of idea. And there's a wealth of them, and that's really what you're going to have to spend some time doing is getting to kind of learn some of the different modules. So the modules come from the marketplace. So the first thing I want to do is I'm going to do marketplace search to list all of the modules that exist that I can install. And when I hit enter, the output here isn't super clean because I increased my font size. So that would be a little bit cleaner had I have not increased my font size. But you can see each one of these is module. So discovery slash info disclosure slash cache snoop is an example of a module. So you can load that module if you wanted to. And we can see over to the right, this module is not installed, right? And the list goes on. There's modules to allow you to import Nmap results into ReconNG. You can see here there's a Bing LinkedIn module. Now, one thing I do want to mention, notice over here we got two columns that are just indicating stars, and that's the D and the K column. D means there's dependencies that are required for this module to get installed. The K means that you need a key installed in order to work with that module. So that's important because, you'll have to obtain a key to work with the LinkedIn module here, for instance, right? So in this demonstration, I'm going to use a couple modules that don't need keys. And you can see here, there's a number of modules that have no dependencies and no requirement for a license key. Okay, so that's the idea. I mean, you can see here as I'm scrolling down, there's a big list of modules, right? Now, what I'm going to do, hit enter. If you want to install a module, you can do marketplace install, and then you specify the module. So for instance, if I wanted to install this reporting pushpin module, I would do reporting slash pushpin. And I happen to pick one that needs a key, so that's not a good idea. Let's go reporting HTML because I am going to show that one at the end of my demo. So let's do reporting HTML. Hit enter, and it's installed that module. So now I can leverage the functionality of that module. Now, what I'm going to do for simplicity is I'm going to do marketplace install, and you can say install all modules. Now, what's going to happen is as it's installing all the modules, I will get some errors for the ones that are going to require dependencies or keys, but that's okay. So I'll hit enter. You can see it's installing all of the modules. Give that a second to install. Shouldn't take too long. Like I said, we'll start getting some errors here towards the bottom of the list. And those are the ones that have dependencies or require keys, API keys. Perfect. So now that we have the modules installed, now what we want to do is start using them. So how you're going to get a list of modules that are installed is you can do a modules and then do a search command. And that'll give us a list of all our modules. And what I like here is I kind of do give a bit of a breakdown if I scroll up. So there's discovery modules. These are the two discovery modules. So it looks like locating information disclosure on the internet, interesting files on the internet, exploitation modules. I like these import modules so you can import Nmap results, for instance, into reconNG. And that's what's important here is to understand that reconNG actually stores everything in a database, and you can actually report on the data that's in the database. So yeah, so you can import your Nmap results. We got recon modules, which are what we're going to take a look at here. We're going to pick a few of these modules and collect information on the internet. And what it's going to do, like you can see here, they got domains and host type modules. So collecting information on what computers exist on the internet for a particular domain, for instance, right? So same thing. As I scroll down, you can see net blocks, so getting the IP ranges used by companies, right? And profile information. And what I love is they also have reporting modules. So like I said, we're going to see the reporting HTML module at the end here. So that's how you can use the modules search command to get a list of all the modules. And then what you'll have to do is you'll have to start playing with some of those modules. Now, I handpicked two here that I want to use just to kind of show you how to use modules and how to collect information from the internet using these modules. So when you want to use a module, what you do is you use the modules load command. And I'm going to use the recon domain contacts / who is pox. So what this module does is it collects information from a who is database, and it'll give you like email contact information and stuff like that from the who is. So I hit enter and it does not like I missed my S on domains. Try that again. There we go. So we got domains contacts who is pox. Hit enter. Notice the prompt has changed, so it's showing me what module I'm currently working in. Now, once you load a module, you'll then use the info command. And what they're trying to do here with reconng is they're trying to make this work or operate kind of like a Metasploit. So if you use Metasploit framework, what you'll do is you'll take a look at all your options for an exploit and you'll set the required settings and then you'll run the exploit. Well, same kind of idea here is I use the info command to look at your options that are required to be filled in with this module before you run the module. And what I can see here is in my options, there's a source, and the source is you specifying the domain that you're trying to collect information for. And I can see that it is required. So what we're going to do is we're going to set that source. So we do options space set, and then whatever the name of the option is. So in this case, it's source, and then we're going to specify skillsoft.com. So that's the domain name of the customer that we're trying to perform OSINT functionality on. So now that I set that, then I can run it. And what's going to happen is that module is going to execute and it's going to go and start collecting all kinds of information from who is databases, right? So you can see down bottom here, it collected 11 new contacts just by that quick little command. And basically that's the theme of the modules. So I go to modules, load. Now we're going to do the recon / domains -host / Bing _ domain web. And again, I just handpicked a couple examples just to demonstrate. So now I've loaded that module and I do the same thing. I do an info. With info, you can read a little bit about what the module does, right? So it says that it collects host information from bing.com, and then we specify the source. So again, I'm going to go and do options set source to skillsoft.com. This is great. We set the source to skillsoft.com. Now I want to run that module. And now it's collecting a list of the computers that exist on the internet within the skillsoft.com. So from a penetration testing point of view, this is important information because now I have a listing of computers that are on the internet owned by this customer that I'm performing a pen test. So we'll give that a minute. Notice that it is putting it in sleep mode, so you can see sleeping to avoid lockout, right? Because after X amount of calls to Bing, it'll lock the system out. So it says, great, we found 33 new hosts, right? So you would continue that process with each of those different modules. So you'll find what modules contain the data that you're looking to collect, and then you'll set the options and then collect it. And then what you can do is you can start looking at your results. Like I said, this information is now stored in a database, for this workspace. So I can use a show command. So now I'm ready to start looking at the results. So I do show ? And it says, okay, you can do a show companies, you can do a show contacts, you can do a show credentials, show domains. Now keep in mind, you would do this only after you used a large number of the modules to collect information. I've only collected really the domain names and contacts, so I'll just show those. So I do a show contacts. And when I hit enter, again, my font is large, so it's kind of word wrap is kicking in, but it basically is a nice table that shows, okay, here is contact number 1 and it's Brian, and here's the email address, right? So you can see we've got contacts and email addresses. So this could be used for a social engineer attack if we wanted to. So now we've got some contacts within the business, we have some email addresses, that kind of idea. And same thing, I can do show host to look at our host. And then we can see the different host names within the skillsoft.com. So that's interesting. So we have that. Now, the other thing that I wanted to point out is, like I said, this is all data stored in a database. So you may want to take a look at the database itself. So I'm going to use the back command to go out of our Bing domain web module. So I go back, and what I'm going to do here is I'm going to use the DB question mark. DB stands for database, and it allows us to interact with the database used by this workspace. So you could do a DB delete to delete a record or delete an entry. You can actually manually do a DB insert where you specify a record that you want to manually insert. A reason why you may do that is you may have collected information through other means, and maybe you want to add that into our workspace so that the report includes that, because the report is going to include anything that's in this database. Now, what I'm going to do here is notice there's a DB schema. I want to show you the structure of this database. So we're going to do a DB schema and hit enter. And if I scroll up, so you can see the tables that exist here. So as you're running the different modules and it's collecting information, it's storing data in these tables. So we have information in the domains table. I forget how many records it was, but there are, a number of domains and host actually. There's companies, there's your network blocks, there's your locations, vulnerabilities. Had we've run some modules that did port scans, right? So you'd have the IP address and ports that are available. Sorry, this is the table that we've got populated, the host table and the contacts table, right? So we've got some information in those. So my point here is just to help you visualize, hey, there's tables in the background that's now storing this data. And when I use the show command, like show host, that's basically what we're doing is we're retrieving the records from that table, which is interesting. Now, the last thing I want to show you is there is a reporting schema that we can use. So we can do modules, load reporting /HTML. And when we do that, we can then use info, just like before, to get a list of our options. And here we can see there's a creator option that is required. There's a customer option that is required as well. And then there's a file name, which is already filled in, but you could change that option if you wanted to. So I'm just going to set the creator and the customer. So I'm going to do an options space set creator, Glennie Clark, and then do options set, and the other one was customer and Skillsoft. And then I'm going to run this module. And what this is going to do is generate an HTML report for us that basically displays all the data that was collected with reconng. So I'm going to highlight this. I'm just going to copy it. And I'm just going to go to a browser and let's take a quick look at this report. So I click up top here. I'll do a Control V, hit enter. So you can see here, there's the customer information, Skillsoft. Now this is an HTML page, so you could go and modify it. You don't have to stick with the kind of the default look of the report here, but the great thing is the basic data is here. So we can see we have information in the summary. We have 33 hosts collected, 11 contacts, and then we can expand out here the host section. And it's a nice little printout of, all the data and also what module was used to collect this data. So that's very useful. And then down below here, we got our contacts. So there's a nice listing of those email addresses. Again, what module was used to collect that information. And then down bottom, there's where they use that creator field is down bottom in the report. So in this demonstration, you saw how to use reconng as an OSINT tool. In this demonstration, we'll take a look at how to crack passwords with John the Ripper. Before we get started, let's take a look at the password hashes that I've obtained from a system that I exploited and grabbed the passwords with Interpreter. So what we're going to do is we're going to go and use a text editor here and just take a quick little glance at the password hash file that we have. So we're going to do a file open. I downloaded these into my downloads folder, and here's my password hashes that I've obtained. So you can see there's a number of user accounts. There's a user account called hacked. There's a user account called user1, user2, user3. There's the administrator account up top here. You can see over to the right are password hashes for these accounts. So John the Ripper can crack those password hashes and tell us what the passwords are for these different accounts. So let's go into John the Ripper. What we'll do is we'll go into the terminal. So we'll launch a terminal in Kali Linux. Just going to zoom in here so that you can see the text a little bit better. Once in a terminal, the first thing that I want to do is point out that Kali Linux has a number of what we call word list files. And these are just common words in a dictionary that people are using for password. So you can find the word list files if you go to cd/user/share/word list. And if I do an ls here, you can see there is the rocku, the very common rocku.txt file. So we could use that as a word list file, but also you'll notice that there is some folders that store other types of word lists. So there's a sec list folder. I want to take a look at that. So I do a cd space sec list, and we'll do an ls in there. And you'll notice that there is a passwords folder in here. Notice there's a usernames folder. So we got our passwords folder right here. We got a usernames folder right here. So lots of text files to help us perform common types of cracking. So let's go into the passwords folder, and we'll do a little ls here. And you'll notice a number of text files that contain common passwords. So up top here is a 2020 most used passwords.txt file. We also have here, where's the other one I'm looking for? The 10 million passwords. Where's that? Right here. So there's the 10 million passwords, text file with 10 million passwords. There's also Twitter banned words, right? So all kinds of different examples, right? So let's print out some of these. So let's go with cat space, and let's do the 2020-200 most used passwords. So if I hit enter there, it prints out the contents. So you can see the contents of these files, just most common passwords. So my point here is that when you're performing password cracking with tools like John the Ripper or any of the other password cracking tools, a lot of times those tools allow you to supply a word list file. And my point here is that Kali Linux has a number of word list files that you can use. So one last one I just want to print out here is the cat the 10 million passwords. So I'm going to hit enter here. Try that again. .txt. So when I hit enter, notice that it's scrolling and it's scrolling and it's scrolling. So there's 10 million passwords within this file. So it's a very large file. And if I just leave it here, it'll continue to scroll for quite some time. I'm just going to Control-C it to stop it. And the point here is you get the idea that we do have a large number of password list files inside Kali Linux that we could use. So let's take a look at John the Ripper. So John the Ripper is also known as John is a password cracking tool that can crack different types of encrypted or hash passwords using different modes, what John the Ripper calls modes. So John the Ripper supports different modes. There's what they call single crack mode, where John the Ripper will try to use common properties of the account, such as like the account logon name. It'll try that as a password. So it tries these characteristics of the account as simple passwords. Single crack mode is a very quick mode for trying to crack the password. But then you have the wordless mode, which is where those dictionary files come into play. So you can supply a dictionary file if you want to. Now, John uses a default set of dictionary files, but you can also specify your own. Then there's the incremental mode, it's called, and that is the brute force attack mode for John the Ripper, where John will try all possible combination of characters to calculate possible passwords. And it's the mode that takes the longest because mathematically it takes a long time to calculate all possible combination of characters to make up passwords. So those are our three modes. So again, that was single crack mode, wordless mode, and incremental mode. Now, you can use John very quickly by doing something like John space. I'm going to do dash dash format. So I'm specifying the format of the password list file that we want to crack. Now, keep in mind, John the Ripper can detect that, but it's also more efficient for you to say, hey, these are NT hashes, so we want you to crack these NT hashes. And then we specify the file name, and the file name is, actually, I'm going to go to my downloads directory. Home. Let's try that again. There we go. So CD downloads. And so there's my password hashes file. So I'm going to do John space. Actually, let me clear the screen so it's at the top of the screen. John space. And then we're going to do the format is NT hashes. And then we're going to specify the file name, which is a file called password hashes in my current directory. So I'm going to hit enter here. And what's going to happen is this runs John in the three different modes. So I haven't specified the mode. So it runs John in single mode, then it'll try wordless mode, and then it'll try incremental mode. And when it tries wordless mode, it'll use a default set of word list. So let's hit enter. And you can see that's pretty quick right off the bat. Notice that it's able to calculate or figure out the password for user 1. It figured out house. User 2, it figured out kids. So I want you to notice that those came up pretty much instantaneously. So using the word list is a very quick approach. Those are simple passwords that are using words in a dictionary, right? The word house is a very common word. So that's the downfall here, is when your users are creating their passwords, they should be encouraged to use complex passwords that are not full words. So you can see it's still going here. It's having some trouble with the rest of the accounts. So I did use a little bit more complex passwords on like the administrator account. So it's taken its time there. So I'm going to pause the video and let that run for a minute, and then we'll take a look at the results. So it's been running for a few minutes here. Just to kind of go over some of the key points here in this output. So the first thing that I want you to notice, it's loading 10 password hashes. Notice that it starts with single mode, and it's trying to crack passwords with single mode. Notice it hasn't shown any passwords in single mode. It does say that if we want to stop, because password cracking can take a long time, so it says press Q or Control C to abort. Any other key for status. And what that means is down bottom here, you can see, it's still running, but we don't see anything on the screen. So for instance, I can hit a space bar and it gave us a status, and we can see the running time is 4 minutes, 12 seconds now. And it kind of shows the attempts that it's on. So you can do that at any point in time, let it run, press any key. I usually press the space bar just to get a status. So it is now currently running in single mode. They said, okay, press Q or Control C. It didn't come up with any passwords in single mode. So then you can see here, it says, okay, now we're going to switch over to word list mode. And it shows the default word list that they're using for a dictionary attack. So they're using the user shared John password list file. And then this is again where we saw the passwords popping up immediately. So this is very quick. We saw the password for hosts and kids pop up, then pass1, host 7. Then it switched to incremental mode. And remember, incremental mode is the brute force attack where the program will try all possible combination of characters to calculate a password. So the point here is it will be successful. 100% it'll be successful. It just may take a very long time for the program to calculate all possible password combinations. So what I want you to notice here that's interesting is host, kids, pass1, and host 7 were 4 passwords that were figured out. So user 1, 2, 5, and 3. Notice that user 4's password wasn't figured out with the dictionary tag. It couldn't figure out user 4's password until it moved to incremental mode. And it's still running in incremental mode as I'm talking here. And it's trying to crack the password for the other accounts, like the administrator account. It still hasn't been able to figure that out. And like I said, it's been quite some time. It's probably been close to 6 minutes now. Let's hit the space bar. Yeah, so 6 minutes, 19 seconds it's been running. So what I want you to notice here is that it's now doing the brute force technique, what they call incremental mode in John the Ripper. So I'm going to cancel that. That would just continue to run. So I did a Control C. The other thing that I want to point out is just what some of your other command options are, right? So when you're using John as a command, let me clear the screen so that the command's at the top. So when we do John and then do space, you can actually specify your operation mode if you want to. So let me do format. I'll do the same thing. Format equals NT. And I'm going to do -- single and then our password hashes file. So you could specify that you want to run in a single mode, right, where it tries the simple passwords. And if you wanted to, you could also specify that you want to run in word list mode. So we could do -- word list and then specify the path to your word list file. So I could do user share word list / whatever the file is. Let's say we had our rocku.txt file there. So you could specify the word list file if you wanted to, and then specify the password file that has the password hashes you're trying to crack. So in my case, that's a file called password hashes. So in this example, with this syntax here, I'm telling it I don't want to use the incremental mode. I only want to use word list mode, right? And it'll do the dictionary tag only. And then you could also use incremental mode, so -- incremental, and then specify your password hash file. So password hashes. So that's how you can manually specify your modes if you wanted to. I didn't do that when I ran mine. So I just specified the format of the hashes and then the password hash file. So what that meant is it went through all 3 modes, starting with the simplest, moving up to the more complex mode, right? So you have those options. So in this demonstration, you saw how to crack passwords with John the Ripper. In this video, we'll take a look at how to perform a vulnerability scan with Nessus. The first thing that we'll do is we're already logged into our Kali Linux system, so we'll launch a web browser. Once the web browser is launched, what we'll do is we'll navigate to our Nessus web page, which is the Kali Linux system where Nessus is installed, port 8834. Now, once connected to the Nessus page, you'll notice that we have over on the left, we have a folder where vulnerability scans are stored, and you can see that I've performed test advanced scan. And then over to the right here, we can create a brand new scan if we want to perform a vulnerability scan. So we click the New Scan button. Now, when you perform a vulnerability scan against systems on your network, the goal here is to choose the type of scan that you want to perform by selecting the appropriate template. And there's different types of scans. So for instance, we can do what they call a host discovery. With a host discovery, the goal is just to discover systems on the network and the open port. So you're not doing a full vulnerability assessment of that system. You're just trying to do a port scan and determine what computers exist or devices exist on the network. But then as I scroll down here in the templates into the vulnerability section, you'll notice that there's different types of vulnerability scans. Now, just to kind of pick a few of these, the first one you'll notice is your typical basic network scan. And this does a full scan that's suitable for most situations, whereas we can do an advanced scan where you have a little bit more choice in the setup of the scan itself, and you'll have some options available to you. But then we have other specialized scans here. So we'll have like a malware scan. If you want to scan a system for malware running on devices, or if you're assessing vulnerabilities on a web application, they have a specific scan type for that. So you can see here we do have a web application test template that we can select to perform vulnerability assessments on web applications. So there are some specialized scans there. What we're going to do is we're just going to go with a basic network scan. And in the basic network scan, within our settings, the first thing we do is we give the scan a name. So I'm going to call this scan of desktop. So I have a desktop system that I'm going to perform a vulnerability scan on. Then you can fill in a description for the scan if you want to. Scan of accounting system to determine vulnerabilities. Down below, you choose which folder over here on the left you want to store your scan in. So I'm going to leave it stored in my scans. And then down bottom here, you can specify the target IP addresses that you want to scan. And here's where you can type IP ranges. So in my case, I'm just going to scan the one system just for time purposes, but you could do a full range of systems if you wanted to. So the IP address of the system that I want to scan is 10.0.0.100, but I could put a dash here and I could do 10.0.0.150 and have it scan all systems between those two ranges, those two numbers. So in this example, I'm just going to go with the 10.0.0.100 system. Now, over here on the left, we also have other options. So there is a schedule option where you could schedule the scan to run on a regular basis if you want to. I'm not going to specify a schedule. You have options as far as like discovery goes, right? And with discovery, it's, how do we discover systems on that network? So you can go and select that if you wanted to as well. Here we can choose or what ports are going to be scanned. Because I'm doing a basic network scan, I don't really have a lot of choices here. That's the whole point of choosing a basic network scan. Had I have selected an advanced scan, I could come in here and I could select on the Discovery tab, I could choose things like, how systems are being discovered, whether that's through like a ping sweep, what protocol do we want to use, and then also I could go and select the ports that are going to be scanned during a port scan. So again, my options are limited here because I am doing a basic scan. Now, over here up top, we have the credentials tab, and this is really important. With the credentials, the whole idea of the vulnerability scan is Nessus is going to connect to that 10.0.0.100 system, and it's going to not only check to see if the system is up and running and check to see what ports are open, but the whole idea is you want Nessus to interrogate the configuration of the system and report back any kind of misconfigurations from a security point of view. Now, in order to read all of the configuration, we're going to have to connect to that system with an administrative account. So that's what the credentials page tab is okay, when we connect to the system, what credentials should we be using? And that way you can get a complete picture of what the configuration of that system is. Now, keep in mind when you perform a scan, you should do what we call a non-credentialed scan first, which is you don't supply the credentials, which means you're going to see what the configuration of the system is if somebody who hasn't authenticated to your system, so an anonymous user, somebody from the internet, let's say, what would they see? So you want to have a visualization of what kind of data is being exposed to a non-authenticated user, but then you also want to perform a credentialed scan where you supply that administrative account. That way you're able to connect to the system as an admin and retrieve all of the configuration information. So do multiple scans against the system, do a credentialed and a non-credentialed scan to get a big picture. So down bottom here, I'm going to go with my Windows credentials. So I click on Windows, and then over here we specify our authentication type. I'm going to go with a password authentication. We fill in our username, which is going to be administrator, the password for that administrator account, and if there's a domain, an Active Directory domain as well, then we specify the Active Directory domain. So once you specify your credentials, then we have up top here, make sure I save that. Okay, good. It's all saved. On the plugins page tab, this is where you specify what it is that you're scanning for. What kind of configuration or security checks do you want to perform? And the idea here is that you would see these different plugins, you'd highlight the plugin, and over on the right, it'll show all the different plugins. So you choose the category over on the left here, and on the right, it would show all the different plugins. And so, for instance, I want to check for backdoors. So I choose backdoors as a category, and then over to the right, you could enable and disable the different backdoor checks that you want to perform. The more checks you perform, the longer the scan is going to take. Now, by default, all these plugins are enabled by default, and you can go and disable the plugins. Now, I can't disable these plugins here because I am doing a basic scan. Had I have selected to do an advanced scan, I could turn on and off these different plugins, which are the different types of vulnerability checks that I want to perform. Now, the reason why that's important is if I know my target is not a Cisco device, for instance, there's no sense, performing Cisco security checks, right? Or if I know there's no database product running on it, then maybe there's no sense doing database checks. Or if I know it's a Windows system, there's no sense performing any of the Unix or Linux checks on it. So that's kind of the idea of being able to enable and disable. Again, because I'm going and doing a basic scan here, I don't have the choices to enable or disable. These are actually all enabled by default. So I'm going to hit save here, and that's going to save my scan. Oh, I added this Windows a second time, so I'll close that, and then I'll hit my save. So here's our scan of desktop. And it's an on-demand scan, meaning we have to manually go in and run the scan because I didn't set a schedule. And then over to the right, I'm going to hit the play button to launch the scan. So the scan will start. You can see the progress arrows there kind of going around in a circle. So it's currently performing the scan against that system. What I'm going to do is I'm going to pause the video and I'll resume it once the scan is completed. All right, so the scan is completed. It took about, I'll say, 10 to 15 minutes to complete the scan. Once the scan is completed, you can view the results by clicking on the scan, so by its name there. Now, once I choose the scan, you'll notice up top here on the left side of our scan results, we have a host tab, and it shows the number of systems that were discovered in the scan. In this case, I only scanned the one IP address, so you can see the one host. But had we have scanned, a full network range, you'd see a list of different hosts here. And then what you could do is you could click on the link for that specific host to view the results of that host. Now, what's interesting here is I can see over on the right a little bit of a line graph that's showing the number of vulnerabilities that exist, and they're color coded to show the severity of the vulnerability. So, for instance, I can see here that there's 5 critical vulnerabilities on the system that I scanned. There's 6 high vulnerabilities, and that looks like there's 10 medium vulnerabilities. And then we have 81 information level events or vulnerability information. So you can see a little bit of a line graph here, which is kind of nice. Also, they show it in a pie chart down bottom here, just so you have an idea of how the system is doing overall. We do have a high number. 5 critical vulnerabilities with this system is definitely something we want to look into. Now, I should stress that this system is an unpatched system, so I was expecting to see a large number of vulnerabilities on this system. Now, you can also look at this view from a different point of view. So you can go to the Vulnerabilities tab, and you can see all the different vulnerabilities here, and we can click on any one of these vulnerabilities to look at the details of the vulnerabilities, right? On the Remediations tab, they give recommendations for what we can do to kind of fix some of those vulnerabilities, right? So here you can see it says Microsoft has released a set of patches for Windows XP 2003, 2008, 7, and 2008 R2. So those patches should be applied to this system. So that's kind of the idea of the general results. Now, if I go to my host here, I can click on the critical vulnerability, and it takes us to our vulnerabilities tab. Now, what you could do as well, along with kind of scrolling through and looking at your high, medium, and low vulnerabilities, you can also choose a vulnerability. So I can click on a vulnerability here and view. So that was what they call a mixed vulnerability, and it's showing the critical vulnerabilities that are grouped with the high vulnerabilities. So then you could choose from one of these vulnerabilities here. So for instance, I'm going to go with the MS 17-010 as a high vulnerability. So if I choose that, it'll give us a kind of a description of the vulnerability. So the remote Windows host is affected by the following vulnerabilities. Multiple remote code execution vulnerabilities exist in the SMB protocol due to improper handling of certain requests. So they kind of give you a little breakdown. And then what's interesting here is that as you kind of read through it, they'll start giving you names of other names that are of vulnerabilities or exploits that this is known as. So it says Eternal Blue, Eternal Champion, Eternal Romance, Eternal Synergy are 4 of multiple equation group vulnerabilities and exploits disclosed, by a group known as Shadow Brokers. Anyway, so it goes through and it kind of gives you information on this vulnerability. The reason why I stress these keywords here is that's going to help me later on down the road. If I'm doing a penetration test, now what I'll do is I'll look for exploits against Eternal Blue or Eternal Champion, that kind of idea. So that's why those keywords kind of stand out to me. Again, not only do they give you information about the vulnerability in the product, so here it's the SMB protocol running in Windows that is vulnerabilities with, they also give you a solution. So down bottom, they let you know there's a set of patches that you can apply to these systems. And notice that they list all the different OSs, that there's patches for. So including Windows 8.1, Windows 10, Server 2016, and they give you links down bottom as well. So for additional information. Now over to the right, you can see the plugin details, right? Now remember, a plugin is a component that was scanned. So you can see here that this is a high severity vulnerability, meaning that it's pretty serious. You want to make sure that you fix or remediate any of the high and critical, and even the medium ones you want to make sure that you look at. But definitely our attention goes to the high and critical vulnerabilities. You can see that it's for the Windows family. It is a remote exploit. And what that means is that in order for a hacker to exploit the system using this vulnerability, the hacker doesn't have to be on that system. They could be somewhere else on the network and exploit the system using this vulnerability, which is a pretty serious vulnerability. And then down bottom, we have our risk information, and here they show the CVSS scores, right? So the scores are kind of what determines whether it's a high, medium, or low vulnerability, right? So we can see here that the base score is a 9.3, which is a pretty serious vulnerability. And then what I love is down bottom here, we'll get vulnerability information. And one of the things that I always look for when performing any kind of a security assessment is, are there exploits available for this vulnerability? Meaning, can I turn around if I'm doing a penetration test, and this is kind of my, one of my phases of my pen test where I'm doing a vulnerability scan, are there vulnerabilities available for me to exploit that system? And it's saying, are there exploits available for me to exploit that vulnerability? And it's coming back with a yes, there are. And then what's interesting is if I keep scrolling down here, it says this is exploitable with. So you can exploit this vulnerability, and it tells you the tool. So it says you can exploit this vulnerability with Metasploit, the SMB double pulsar remote code execution exploit. So not only are they telling me, hey, this is exploitable, they're also telling me what tool to use within Kali Linux. So that would be my next step, is to go in and launch Metasploit and exploit that vulnerability. So in this demonstration, you took a look at how to perform a vulnerability scan against a system. In this demonstration, we'll take a look at how to use an exploitation tool within Kali Linux. So we'll start by launching a terminal up top on the toolbar. Once in the terminal, what I'm going to do is zoom in a little bit here so you can see the text a little bit better as I type my commands in. Now, once in our terminal session, the first thing that we want to do is we want to run Metasploit. Metasploit is a framework that has a whole bunch of exploits built into it for exploiting different products. So to get into Metasploit, we do an msf console is the command. Now that'll take a few seconds here as Metasploit loads up. As I mentioned, it has a whole bunch of exploits built into it. But not only that, it also has what we call scanners built in as well. So a lot of times there's scanners to find systems on the network that are exploitable with a particular exploit. Now, once inside our Metasploit here, notice that our prompt has changed. At the bottom of the screen, you can see I now have an MSF6 prompt where I've got a cursor waiting for me to type in my commands. Now, the idea here is I've already gone and run a vulnerability scan against a bunch of target systems, or it could be just one system. Now, in a previous demo, I've gone and performed a scan on just one system, and I found that that system was vulnerable to what we call the eternal blue exploit. So what I want to do is see if Metasploit has the eternal blue exploit that I can leverage to attack that system. So within Metasploit, there is a search command that you can use, and you can search for keywords like eternal blue if you wanted to. And notice that it comes up with a number of results. So it looks like I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6 results here for different exploits that exist. Now, when you look at the results, they're modules. Each result is a module, and the modules are organized by the type of module it is. So for instance, if it's an exploit, it's inside of like an exploit folder. So you can see here that this first one, which is the one I'm going to use, is an exploit. So is the second one, so is the third one. But look at this. The fourth one here is using auxiliary as a folder versus exploit as a folder, and so is the fifth one as well. So this is an example of these are scanners, right? So this is a scanner to detect systems on the network that are vulnerable to the eternal blue or have the eternal blue vulnerability. And it also shows the vulnerability number as well there. So my next step is once I see the vulnerability I want or the exploit, I can see up top here, I'm going to use this exploit Windows SMB MS17010 Eternal Blue. So I'm going to use that. Use it, we use the use command. And then you can start typing in the path to the exploit that you want to use. So use exploit / and then I can type Windows. Now I want to stress we do have the tab keystroke as well that you can use to autocomplete. So we can do that as well. So use Windows /SMB /MS17 _010 _eternal blue. Make sure I have no typos. And I do have a typo over on exploit. Exploit Windows SMB. Perfect. So I hit enter and it has loaded that exploit. Now you can see here it changes my prompt to the exploit prompt. In brackets there, it specifies the exploit that you're currently using. Now it does say that there's no payload configured. So what that means is that there is some configuration here, and specifically here they're saying that we haven't configured the payload. The payload is once you exploit the system, what is it that you want to run against that system? And notice that it does say it's going to default to what we call Meterpreter. And that's fine. I'll get to that in a few minutes. But I do want to point out the next thing that you would do after you specify that you want to use that exploit is you want to check out the options. Are there any settings that I should set on this exploit before I execute it? So we use the show options command and hit enter. And then what happens here is they'll show you a list of options that can be configured. And when you're looking at the options, so there's an rhost option and there's a current settings column. So it looks like rhost has no current setting. But what's interesting is it is a required setting. So that option has to be set before I run this exploit. So my point is, that's something I have to configure before I even run the exploit. The rhost stands for remote host, and it's the system that you want to perform the exploit against, right? So I do need to fill that in. So I look at this and see, okay, are there any other required parameters that are not currently filled in? So it looks like the remote port is already filled in. It looks like the verify architecture is already filled in, verify target. So it looks like all of the other required parameters are filled in, which is perfect. Down below, they show you the exploit target, right? So this exploit will work against a Windows 7 or a Server 2008 R2 system, okay? So I want to set that option, that rhost option. So we do a set rhost space, and then whatever the IP address is of the system you want to exploit or attack. After I hit enter, it comes back and says, great, our host has been set to 10.0.0.100, and now we're ready to go and run the exploit. So I run the exploit. So it performs the attack on that system. Now, if it's successful here, I'm going to get the words win, right? Letting you know that, hey, this was successful. If it wasn't successful, then I'll get a fail. So you can see here, it is going and sending commands over to using the SMB protocol. And down bottom here, the eternal blue overwrite completed successfully. Down below that, I can see there's a win. And it's showing that the 10.0.0.101, which is my Kali Linux system, has basically made a connection to the 100 system, and they're showing the ports that are being used here. But it was successful, and notice that my prompt has changed. So I am now in a Meterpreter session, and Meterpreter is a whole other tool. It's a totally different command set that's used for what we call post-exploitation. So once you've exploited the system, so Metasploit is used to exploit the system, but once you've exploited the system, you can use Meterpreter as a post-exploitation tool. Now, the whole idea of Meterpreter is that, great, you're on the system, now what do you want to do? And typically what hackers would do is they would now spend some time and they collect information about your system, right? So I can use the sysinfo command. Now, this is a meterpreter command. So you have to be in a meterpreter prompt to use sysinfo. And I can see the name of the computer is Win7a. It's a Windows 7 operating system, 64-bit, right? I can see there's one user logged on to the system. So I can basically use a whole set of these meterpreter commands. PWD stands for print working directory. So, like I said, I'm on that target system right now, and I can see that I'm on the C Windows System 32 folder of that system. Now, I could go to the command prompt of that system if I wanted to and do Windows based command prompt stuff, or I could stay here in the meterpreter shell and use meterpreter commands. Now, just as an example of something I can do here, I'm going to use the hash dump command. Now, again, this is a meterpreter command, and it's used to steal the hashes of all the user accounts that exist on that system. So I can hit enter here, and there's the password hashes of all the user accounts that exist on that Windows system. So at this point, what the hacker would do is, again, they're using Meterpreter to collect information about the system. There's a bunch of usernames and password hashes that we want to crack in another step. So I'm going to highlight those and I'm going to copy them. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to put them into a text file. So I'm going to launch a text editor here and put them into a text file. And I'm going to save this file into my, let's say, my downloads directory. And I'm going to call it password hashes and then hit save. So in another step in my penetration testing process, I can go and spend some time using a password cracker and try to crack those password hashes. Once you've gone and interrogated the system and have performed whatever actions you want to perform on the system, and I should mention that this meterpreter prompt, there is a question mark for you to see all of the different post-exploitation commands that you can use. So there's the hash dump command that I just used, right? But there's a whole set of commands. You can turn on their webcam, you can record using the microphone of their system, that kind of idea. So there is a question mark that you can use to find out what commands are supported. Now I'm going to hit exit or type exit here to get out of the meterpreter shell. And then I'm going to type exit to get out of the Metasploit tool. So again, it was Metasploit that I used to exploit the system to gain access to that system. In this demonstration, you saw how to use an exploitation tool within Kali Linux.